Okay, welcome to Office Hours. It's a 30-minute webinar to help you successfully achieve SIP certified. From December through May, we'll host 6 of these webinars where SIP certified staff and experts will be online to go over all 14 chapters of the standards and answer your questions. So some general tips for completing your application this year. Do your requirements first, since they're often a little more difficult and you must achieve them to get certified. When you answer the management enhancement questions, answer the ones that you can right now, and keep a list of the ones that you can achieve later. And we also recommend using the photo list. It's a list of all the standard questions that require photos. So you can take this with you, go around your property and snap all your photos at once. And I will put that link in the chat box so you guys have it. And all right, so for those of you who are new to the database, there are a handful of symbols in there that correspond with different questions. So I will show those to you and explain what they mean. Do share screen. Okay. So the leaf there means that the question applies to vineyards. The tank means the question applies to wineries. When you see both, it means that vineyards and wineries have to answer the question. If there's a little calendar, it means that it is a time-sensitive question. So there's a date box that you also must complete. The double arrow here means that it's a management group question. So if you have multiple properties, you can create a management group and answer all these questions for the properties at the same time. And the handshaking icon means that in addition to being documented, this question also must be verified during your on-site inspection. Okay, so each of these office hours webinar will focus on 2 to 3 chapters, and we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. We'll call out the standards by number as we go through them so you can follow along and know which questions we're talking about. And while each one of these webinars focuses on specific chapters, feel free to bring any questions that you have. Just please refer to them by number so that we can pull it up. And all of these webinars will be recorded and posted to the info hub on sipcertified.org. And if it's your first time getting SIP certified, know that it takes about 60 to 80 hours to document the standards your first year. But once you're certified, you can expect to invest just around 20 hours each year. And also know that you're not alone. We are here to help answer your questions, provide you with resources, and help in any way that we can along the way. So this 5th office hours webinar will cover chapters 5, water conservation and quality, and 6, energy conservation and efficiency. And we're joined today by Kevin Bargetto. He's the winemaker at Center of Effort, and they're going on their 11th year of vineyard certification and their 5th year of winery certification. So thank you for joining us, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So today we're discussing chapters 5 and 6, and both of these chapters have both vineyard-specific questions and winery-specific questions. So Kevin, since you're super familiar with the winery stuff, we will jump in with chapter 5 and start talking about those requirements.
Did you want to start with chapter 6, or do we want to
we can do
go
6.
through? Yeah, that's what I thought we had talked about.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, it's hard to believe that we're already on the 5th year for winery certification. It's crazy how fast the time goes. But yeah, we've been really pleased with the program. It's made us just think more critically about how we can just be sustainable. So that's a win for everyone. But yeah, so I'll work my way through the chapter. So starting with section 6.1. Point 1. And in this subsection of the chapter, there are no requirements, so it's all just enhancements. So ones that I know we do and are just good practice are that first one, so 6.1.1. And electricity has been a big one for us because we have solar on property, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot. So it's making sure that we're getting the most benefit from solar. So I spend probably too much time on PG&E, especially that first year as we started making changes and just taking a really hard look at when we're running equipment and looking at how just by offsetting when we run, whether it's pumps or chiller, installing cycle timers, all those things, it really can offset the load and have a pretty huge effect on stuff. So looking at PG&E and being familiar with their interface is really important. And it's actually quite easy to look at certain time ranges, whether it's a day, breaking up in 15 minutes, or for a month or so. So it's cool to be able to look at historical trends as well. So how are we doing now relative to before we did these changes? So I highly recommend becoming familiar with PG&E because it's very easy to quantify what you're doing. So another thing that we do is in 613. So just taking use of natural lighting. We did a remodel a couple of years ago, and that was a big one. So it's skylights that kind of just naturally bring light into our buildings. And then, of course, using energy efficient bulbs. So if you're not using those, I guess just as time goes on, just kind of switching to more energy efficient things to do there. And then in 614, we use ATVs. We also have a little electric golf cart that we use. And this probably doesn't quite fit in this, but we just got 2 electric tractors. So that's going to be used for a lot of kind of your basic farming things like mowing or Clemens hoe, stuff like that. And even harvesting at night, because it's going to have a lot of lights on it, being that it's electric. So that's going to be another use, and those 2 tractors will be powered by our solar field. So really limiting inputs of diesel there.
And that would be captured in another part of the standards for someone who is certifying a vineyard and a winery too.
Yeah. And yeah, I just noticed that one had the little vineyard leaf as well, which is kind of why I think
Yeah,
I
perfect.
mentioned it. And then grazing animals, that's one of my favorite ones because that means for like 3 or 4 months out of the year, we have these adorable goats and sheeps on property that are, just helping stop multiple passes to the vineyard. So we're limiting the amount of diesel and inputs that we put into the vineyard. Let's see. Yeah, there's a lot of enhancements on this one. So I like looking at 619 and 610. Those kind of go hand in hand with me because that's something I already kind of talked about as well, is just looking at each energy bill, making sure we're being as efficient as we can. And then based on that, looking at ways to reduce the overall load as well. So those are two easy ones just to get a couple points from as well. Okay, I think I'm going to move on just because, again, chapter 5 and 6 are both pretty long, and there's a lot that needs to be touched on. So moving on to 621, that's saying that you make sure that the chiller is sized appropriately for the winery. This is kind of a difficult one for sure, because I don't think anyone that works at a winery is a certified chiller install maintenance guy. But really, we just used what was on property. It seemed to fit well for our needs. So there's no need to increase size when we went through and replaced it. 622, that is an important one. I kind of just touched on that, but just employing the measures to reduce the loads on the chiller during certain times of the day. So a big one is our peak period with PG&E is between 12 and 6 p.m. So what we do is we set the chiller to have a slightly higher delta for when it kicks on. So instead of every couple degrees, it would kick on to chill the glycol back down. We just make that delta just a little bit bigger, so it's not running nearly as frequently. And that is for sure one of our biggest demands in terms of energy. So being mindful of just kind of your biggest energy users can really help limit the load and energy use. And then 623, that is another requirement, that is inspecting your refrigeration system weekly and then keeping inspection logs, excuse me. This is a great one, to just make sure everything's working normally, but additionally, keeping an eye on the chiller and making sure that it's happy, making sure we're not having problems kind of getting ahead of any preventative maintenance that might come up. So that's a great thing about SIP too, is it just keeps you having a more watchful eye on all your equipment and can kind of beat something breaking down before it happens. Let's see. We don't do any enhancements on this page, so I'm just gonna actually go ahead and skip those. So moving on to section 6.3. So both requirement 1 and 2, this is a little, I would say, out of the ordinary exemption that we got for both of these requirements. And that basically just had to do with the way our facility is set up with already so much outdoor tank storage and glycol lines and hot water lines outside. It would have cost probably north of $500,000 to get all of these projects done. And that just didn't really make sense for us. And we really only use those tanks during harvest when we're actually trying to kind of shed heat from those ferments. So that in our mind wasn't really a sustainable option. So we actually kind of got, like I said, an exemption from those.
And that's a
But in
good point.
6,
Within SIP certified, requirements are required, and we haven't offered many exemptions in the past, but it's always something that the program is open to discussing. So if there was an instance like yours where it truly was not, a sustainable option to expend that amount of cash, you're kind of losing that third P, the prosperity bit. And that, that's a really good case for having an exemption. These rules are all, science-based, they're written with experts, but you're also, trying to write them so that they fit lots of different operations and different locations and different sizes. And of course, it's never going to be a one size fits all.
Certainly. Yeah. So moving on to 633, tanks must be inspected for coolant leaks, and leaks must be recorded and promptly repaired. So again, this is a good one to get into practice of. And again, the benefit of SIP is it just kind of helps catch things that are happening out there. We had always had this persistent little leak, and it was just kind of part of, that's what it is. But with this, it forced us to take a harder look at it. And we actually put some UV dye in our glycol, and then using a special flashlight, you can turn off all the lights in the cellar and kind of shine lights everywhere. And sure enough, we found a small little pinhole leak in the back of the tank that had just been slowly leaking out glycol for who knows how many years. So all of a sudden, you fix that, and then, there hasn't been a leak in years. So again, the benefits of just going through and doing those, building those systems and adhering to them. And we use a system called Upkeep. It's a maintenance software, and it's really, really valuable for us. And if you look at any of the checklists that we submit, that is the format that it's in. And it just basically puts everything on a timed checklist. And then it forces us and our maintenance team to go through on the scheduled basis and do those checklists. Because if you don't have a system in place for them, there's so many checklists that must be done, you're going to lose track of them, and you're not going to be doing them properly.
That's a great tip.
So I like enhancement 635, an alternative method of cold stabilization. So we've kind of moved away from traditional cold stabilizing by lowering the temperature on a tank. We don't really have great ability to drop our house glycol down without causing a huge energy demand. So we've switched to using CMC based products. So that's carboxymethyl cellulose. And that is a way of moving away from the energy intensive traditional cold stability and basically just doing an additive that cold stabilizes your wine that way. So that is an easy one to move away from just kind of a huge energy demand. 641, moving on to the next section. This is more vineyard based stuff because this is well pumping. So Greg may be able to talk about this one more. But that is just basically making sure you're testing your pump every 3 years. So our vineyard team, we just kind of put that on them, and they set up that testing every couple of years. Air compressor, so making sure you got that size correctly. So we put in, gosh, 8-9 years ago now, we've just put in very energy efficient compressors that only run when there's a demand for air and storage. And we also put those on cycle timers so they're not running during peak periods. 643, I actually just talked about that one. So just making sure you're only running the unit when there's a demand for air. A lot of those enhancements are vineyard related.
I think we did just have Greg pop on. So if he has anything to chime in about the management enhancements, or if they seem pretty straightforward, we can incorporate you into a later section too.
I think they're seem covered. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you great. Yeah, Whitney, do you want to introduce who Greg is? I know we're kind of midstream.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so we're also joined today by Greg Gonzalez with Coastal Vineyard Care Associates. And yeah, he's been involved with the organization for several years now, and he's currently Vineyard Team's board president. So we asked him to join on to talk about some of the winery standards. Hi, Greg.
Hello.
Got you in the truck, I see.
Yeah, sorry, I was in spotty area, so I figured now I feel like I'm maybe half glitchy, but I'm here.
Not too bad.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to 651 then, just again for the sake of time, just because there is so much to each of these chapters.
Yeah.
So requirement 651, you must reduce heating and cooling by utilizing at least 4 of the following. So we have temperature controlled cellar. We use louvered ventilation panels. We have the time automatic roll-up doors. And those things are awesome. I highly recommend those, because especially during those hot days, just to have that door automatically close behind you as you're moving barrels or case goods in and out. That's a huge, as you can imagine, avenue for cold air to escape and hot air to come in to the cell you're trying to keep cold. And then we also have the high-speed roll-up doors, as well as weather stripping kind of everywhere. 652, you must have a schedule for regularly cleaning, replacing air filters and condenser coils. So again, this is just something that's on upkeep. It just happens on a routine basis. Our maintenance guy stays on top of it. Enhancements there, I think I'm just going to go ahead and skip those again, just to keep moving. So moving on to section 6.6, requirement number 1. At least 50% of electric lighting must be from energy efficient bulbs, LED. So all the bulbs that we use in the winery, those are LED. And then all of the bulbs in the offices and tasting room were replaced during the renovation. So those are all new energy efficient bulbs as well. We also have the motion detector. So moving to enhancements in 664, all of the offices have the motion detector to automatically turn off when things are not in use. And we have lots of 665, also lots of skylights in the cellar as well. Okay, moving on to 67, requirement number 1. Yeah, all temperature controlled rooms, including offices and hospitality areas, must have functioning thermostats and are programmed to conserve energy. So those also, we have those set up to not run during peak periods, and we try to run those as infrequently as possible. And then 672, so this relates to inside the winery. Heating and cooling jackets must be turned off when tanks are not in use. So it's part of our SOP just to always turn off jackets whenever they're not being used. And then we use a system called TankNet, which I'm sure a lot of wineries out there use. And that actually allows myself to go on the computer. I can pull up a report of every single tank, and I can see which tanks are on, which tanks are off. And I check that very frequently to make sure there's no tanks that are left on in the cellar. Enhancement number 4 in that section. So yeah, we have on-demand heaters. We've replaced those with new models, and those are just very energy efficient. So those save a ton of energy, and we place them throughout the cellar so there's not as much waste getting that hot water where it needs to go. So section 6.8, that is all enhancements there. So I'll just do kind of a quick pass and see, and Greg, feel free to contribute if you see any. Looks like the first one is vineyard related as well. But for us, this is a huge one because we have a solar field that we installed now. What was that, 2016 or 2017? And like I was saying, we've now switched the way we run our equipment, the time we run it, how hard we run it during certain hours. And that has allowed us to completely offset all of the energy that we use in the winery as well as the tasting room. So before we made those changes, we were actually paying a pretty significant amount of money and using a significant amount of energy every year. But just by changing how we run that equipment, we've been able to completely offset all of that.
And that's a great sustainable story. We featured that. It's on our homepage, sipcertified.org, under sustainable stories category. It's really neat how just like a couple of small things made a massive difference.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's all small things that you think are going to make a big difference, but you do enough of them and it all kind of compounds into significant change. Well, Greg, unless there's anything you want to add, I think that kind of wraps up chapter 6 there.
No, you did an amazing job.
Thanks.
Covered both sides. A lot of it's, in a state. There is, I would say the big difference is that you're a state vineyard winery, and kind of that mix of resources that you can have available to you, opposed to, the biggest bang for your buck that I've noticed on vineyard specific, just vineyards only, maybe not even have a shop is really looking at your pumping costs and your time of use, because those are going to be your biggest pulls, and the ag rates vary drastically. So your ability to either work with a third party to help you understand your time of use and how that relates to PG&E's ever-ending moving target of rate adjustments, and then locking yourself in. So getting your pump test, understanding your rates and your time of use, and then managing. You get huge savings just off of the right rate and then using it at the right time. So that's what I'll add there.
All right. Well, yeah, we are kind of coming up on time. I know we got started a few minutes late. So let's hop into chapter 5, and we'll try to do this one quickly. So if you guys just want to mention like a few of the requirements that you have some good tips on, or like you guys really fulfill in a great way, like let's go ahead and start with those.
I don't know. Can you prompt me? I'm
Yeah,
working off of cell phones here.
Yeah, I know you're working off of a tiny
Sorry.
device
Oh,
there.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of section 5.1 is about the wells, like pumping
Yes.
efficiency, protecting from chemical contamination.
Yep.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So that's the general water use efficiency. It's really what SIP and the certification brings you, is to really start thinking it as a precious resource. I've spent a lot of time with clients, and they're just like, yeah, it's pumping costs. But if you really start to value water as a massive resources that really isn't just a cost of pumping, or is meaning that it's something that we have to use, and we're being restricted with Sigma and all these other things, that if you take a step back and really start looking at it, writing things down is the big thing. So then data leads to very clear opportunities, and between your pump test and understanding how efficient that can be, or what in that system, and then your distribution uniformity, it gives you a foundation to really start looking at, chapter by chapter. Because sometimes you look at a chapter and say, my scheduling, I'd really like to be better at my scheduling, but your limitation is actually relative to your system. So your actual in-field infrastructure. So it would be great if I could do 2 4-hour sets to be more efficient with my water. But my system limitations are 1 8-hour set, or I'm not going to be able to get that second 4 hours on to get my total water requirements. And the further you dive down into really understanding what the vine's needs are and the demand, and then your system that is to deliver that demand, the further you become in terms of it's easy, points start getting knocked off. You start every chapter, it's all relative in each chapter, and each section in that chapter. But it starts with knowing your system, and that is your DU, distribution uniformity, and your well. That's your source. Your irrigation system is how that then source gets distributed throughout your vineyard. But going into it, when you have say a new client, or someone who hasn't touched that chapter in a while, there's tons of opportunity, and it's an easy win for continuous improvement, because you see dramatic results in these small improvements that you can make. So that's a broad perspective of chapter 5 and just water use efficiency in general. But if there's something that, something to dig into on the vineyard side, your water use efficiency is chapter 5 is, you can spend some minimal efforts with just some little investigation and get massive results off the back end. So that's my summary of chapter 5. in
I think that's great on the
under
vineyard side.
3
And I feel like
minutes.
we don't get that many questions about chapter 5. You know, doing a DU
Yeah.
or things like that are pretty straightforward. People are accustomed to that as a practice. It helps them with the consistency. The other thing that's been huge about chapter 5 is in terms of regulatory relief. So if you're in region 3, you get regulatory relief in Ag Order 4.0. And that comes from a ton of chapters throughout the whole standards, but a lot of them are in this chapter specifically. And that's allowed us for 20 years to say people who are doing this program, you know, are doing these practices that help protect water quality and the resource. Kevin, do you have anything on the winery questions?
Yeah, I
that
think
are
I
in
can
here?
kind of condense down what I think are the two most important section. That's 5.9 and 5.10. And these are both great for, you know, SIP purposes as it relates to saving water, but then also for just employees as well. So for example, 591, that is all, you know, tanks and transfer lines must be sanitized with a known quantity of water. So, you know, we went through and made a sheet of everything that depending on the size of the tank, here's how much water you use, here's how much chemicals you use. So as before, it's like, you know, people would just kind of grab a bucket of chemicals and hold the hose of the tank for way too long. With this process, we've basically, you know, we've kind of standardized the minimum amount of water to use and how to be as sustainable as you can when it comes to sanitizing things. And then also, you know, making sure that in 592, you're using high pressure, low flow stuff for cleaning. So it's easy to want to stand there with just the hose open with water to spray down a floor, but it uses 10 times more water and it's way less efficient. So just by throwing nozzles on, using pressure washers, it's amazing how much water you can save, because we have really high flow rates here. When you just open the hose, it's about 60 gallons a minute versus with a nozzle at 6 gallons a minute, or a pressure washer about 2 gallons a minute. So it's really, really drastic how much water you save just by using the appropriate tools to put on. So that's part of our training with people. And then 5.10.1, this is just great practice as well with cleaning processing equipment, is, you know, making sure you're using, again, the high pressure, low flow, making sure you broom and squeegee as much up as possible first, and then come out with the hose and give it the final rinse down. So all of these things are just another way for us to train our people and train our team every year. And that's part of our training operations. We have a little spot for SIP there, and we talk about all the sustainable ways we go about cleaning, because water is really, really important for ourselves. We only have, you know, a finite amount in our storage tank. So to not be pulling too much from the well, but then also to not put ourselves in a tough position and run out of water, because that can happen if we're not careful. So those are the kind of two main sections that I think are really important for the winery. And then other stuff is, you know, relates to quality, which is pretty easy for ourselves. We have RO, and then wastewater ponds, which we have retention ponds as well.
Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great overview of the winery questions in here. I know there's a ton. These were two really big chapters. We kind of blew through them, but I think we hit the really important points. So yeah, let me just open it up for Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A section and we will address them. And so while you guys are doing that, I will thank our hosts again, Greg and Kevin, for joining us. Yeah, this was a lot to hit, but
Yeah.
again, I feel like we touched the good stuff.
And Whitney, will this video be available later?
Yes, it will be, Beth. Thank you for asking. We will post the recording. We have a YouTube playlist for these office hours recordings, and then on the info hub at sipcertified.org, they are also in a post called Office Hours. Cool. All right. So no questions. So I guess we'll close it out. Okay. Thank you guys again for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Happy to help.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.